Hi, everyone. I'm Christine Tully, President and Executive Writing Coach at Defend, Publish, and Lead, and welcome to episode 261, 5 Decisions to Make About Your Writing in 2026. One of the nice things about starting the podcast for the new year is we can do a couple of episodes that are based on lists. And this one, we're going to focus on looking at academic writing and some questions to ask yourself. So these are not designed to be prescriptive in any way, but they're just 5 questions that I find really helpful when I'm trying to think through how to redo some of my writing habits and to think about projects for the new year in sort of a low key, low pressure kind of way. So the first one is decide. So we're counting backwards. So number 5, counting down. Are you actually doing that project? Many of us have zombie projects that we have half finished, maybe ones that have been carrying on for a couple years, or ones that we keep putting down in favor of something else because we just don't want to do them. I know right now I have at least 2 of these. And so one thing that I'm trying to think about this year is just to decide yes or no. Am I actually doing this project or not? And if I am doing it, I want to think about a project completion plan. So that's something that I'll work on in another podcast episode that I'll share. But at least for me, just deciding yes or no, am I doing it? And deciding this is the year. If I'm doing it, I'm finishing it because I really want to get rid of it. Sometimes I call these projects yucky writing projects. Yucky for a lot of reasons. I mean, some of these, they're projects with baggage. You don't want to do them because you're not interested in them anymore, or you've got just a lot of negative feedback associated with the project. Whatever the reason is, you may want to just decide. Another thing to think about when you're trying to decide what to do about some of these sort of zombie projects is that a lot of these are based on old dissertation material. If you're someone that's newer, a newer scholar out in the field, a lot of people feel pressure to use part of their dissertation. And for some people, they just don't want to, and they want to move on to something new, assuming that you have the time and you're able to produce publications in another way. That could be totally acceptable. But other projects might be more obligation projects that come along later in your career. At least for me, I had a project that I thought was going to turn out to be an easy project, and it's really been anything but easy. So that's one of my projects. And the other one is just on a topic I'm not that interested in, but I'm about 2/3 of the way finished. And it's hard for me to say I don't want to actually complete the project, but I need to just decide yes or no, am I doing the project? So number 5, ask yourself if you're actually doing that project. Number 4 is, do you have outdated writing debris? And what this one is are there just a bunch of files that are about projects that are already finished and you don't need them anymore? So for example, I talked with a client and we talked about email specifically and having an overcrowded email box. But one of the things I found out was that this person had been hanging on to lots of acceptance emails and things like that. And she did not need these for tenure and promotion or anything like that. These projects were already in print. And so we kind of just decided, what are we going to do with some of these emails? If you want, make a folder, make an archive or something, dump them in there, delete them. Some of them were more of the back and forth communication. We had another client where he was working on a book and he figured out he had somewhere in the neighborhood of like 400 emails associated with that project. And the book is already in print and it had been out for several years with no problem or anything like that. So we talked through, should he go through and read all these emails? What should he do with them? And so in his case, he just decided to delete them all. And of course, you could say, well, what if there's that really, that one email that's going to come back and haunt you that you don't have it? He just decided to take the chance because he didn't want the debris. Another thing, if you're watching this on YouTube, you can see a screen image of a really littered digital desktop. I'm totally guilty of this, where I will keep lots of like sort of temporary files of things like screenshots for a project about some notes or a chart or something like that. And I no longer need them once I'm finished, particularly for conference presentations. Once I've given the presentation, any kind of like screenshots or other things I wanted to throw in there, I'm really bad at leaving a lot of these on my desktop. So one thing that I don't want to take with me into 2026 is just a whole lot of outdated writing debris that I don't need. The projects, for whatever reason, I just don't need whatever those things are. And I'm just doing a quick sweep of my desktop, but also things like versions of drafts. I can, at the end of every writing session, I do save a draft and back it up and all that kind of stuff. But I also email a lot of drafts to myself as sort of a backup now and then, just in case. And I have a lot of those emails, but I don't really need the day-to-day changes in drafts. Of course, if you want to do a self-study of writing, that's kind of cool to see how writing has changed. But if you have like 70 drafts or 90 drafts of something, maybe you don't need all those drafts. So some of those things could go. And at least for me, I don't want some of that stuff getting mixed up with new projects I'm actually working on because I want to reduce any friction for me getting started on a project. Here's another one that I might think about. So, number three, how much of your week do you want to devote to writing? I talk about this all the time about trying to commit ahead of time to a writing range of hours. How long are you actually completing writing projects? But at least for me, I try to think about a range between, do I want to write between 8 and 10 hours a week? Okay, if I'm going to do that, I need to think about where is that writing going to go. And I actually like to think about this semester by semester because obviously my schedule changes. I have different classes, I have different meetings and things like that. But just a good question in 2026 is to ask yourself this question. And it's possible the answer is not the same every week. So maybe some weeks, in weeks that are not heavy grading weeks, you want to spend between 5 and 7 hours a week on your writing. But in heavy grading weeks, maybe only 3 to 5 or something like that. But deciding ahead of time allows you the opportunity then to look at your calendar and find out where that writing time is going to go. So this is something that I'm paying particular attention to as I head into the spring semester to kick off 2026. So just decide how much of your week. You might decide this semester I have a really heavy teaching load. There's no way I'm going to do 8 hours a week. I might only be able to do 3, and that's fine. But just knowing that ahead of time will allow you to know, hey, I don't have a lot of time to work on my writing. I really cannot either waste the time or give it up if somebody tries to schedule over it, particularly if I have projects that I need to complete. It also might mean that I'm either going to make slower progress on a writing project because I'm only working 3 hours a week on writing, or I cannot work on multiple projects at a time. But just deciding ahead of time, particularly at the start of the semester, that really helps to just say, how many hours do I want to devote? So at least for me, I try to shoot between 8 and 10 a week. This semester, I have a little bit more wiggle room during the day. So I think I'm going to up my range to like between 9 and 12. Number two, how will you promote your writing? This is a question I'll ask clients all the time, and they'll complete a writing project. We have many people that complete work with us, either through writing coaching or through our workshops that we run for universities. But I always ask this question of faculty. I'll say, okay, that's so great. You published that article or that book, fabulous. What are you doing to promote the writing that you are doing? And not just the writing you're doing right now or the research you're doing now, but what about that project you did 3 years ago that's still pretty significant? What are some things that you are doing? And so one of the things that I know I'm leaning into more with our clients, but also in my own work is just when I publish something, what am I doing about it to circulate it? Of course, I'm talking with, colleagues and people that are interested, but I'm doing a little bit more on LinkedIn and just doing a quick post. I just did one on LinkedIn about an article I wrote for Inside Higher Ed with Jennifer Ahern Dodson about faculty writing support and how people don't, necessarily know where to find that on campus. So I'll put a link to that post in the show notes so you can check out what I mean by that. But this takes just a second. And I know for me, that actually helps some people find that research and then reach out to me. Particularly, I work in the area of faculty writing. That's why I do this podcast. And it just made me kind of make a better connection with the community. So thinking about that with every writing project and even ones that you just did a couple of years ago, how could you get those back out there again? We'll certainly do more episodes about that on the podcast and probably a workshop or two, but it's worth thinking about because the cycle of publication doesn't really end with the publication or with, your book being promoted at a conference or that scholarly article, being, promoted maybe by the journal or by one of the big publishers in the first couple of months the issue's out, because we all know there's so much scholarship out there. It's hard for people to find it. And one of the best ways to get it to the people that need it is by you talking about it. So it could be through LinkedIn, it could be through social media, but it also could be through other forums. So maybe your discipline has an organization group, like a special interest group and you let people know, hey, I wrote about this thing. One of the things that I've thought about is one of my books is about academic motherhood that I've talked about on this podcast. And we have a special interest group devoted to that in my disciplinary organization. So that's the group that I need to say, hey, I published this book. Here's the link to it if anybody wants to check it out. And then finally, what's one project that you actually want to complete this year? And so why I'm saying just one is that, of course, many of us will complete several projects over the course of an academic year. Maybe there's some projects that we're in a revise and resubmit stage. There's some that are being submitted for the first time, but what's one thing you actually want to do? And so I thought about this a little bit, and I've been working on a book project that's going to get submitted relatively early in the year. But a second thing that I want to do is to really work on completing my article about dream writing projects. Like what makes a project a dream writing project, like something somebody's always wanted to research or do, and then what do they do to actually pull it off? So I would think through what would check that box for you. What's one project that you want to complete this year? And then finally, as we close this episode, as you know, Textbook and Academic Authors Associations are our sponsor. And I also want to point out, just thinking ahead in 2026, that they have launched a new Textbook and Academic Authors Institute for 2026, which is basically like going to scholarly writing school in the summer, June 12th and 13th of 2026. It's virtual, but registration to open today, the day that I am I am doing this podcast, and it is New Year's Day, the day that I'm recording it. So I will put a link in the show notes, but I encourage you to check it out because this is one way for kind of a low touch, very easy way to get involved and up your academic writing. There will be people talking about all sorts of writing, and there'll be strands for novice and veteran authors. So I definitely would encourage you to check that out. They're one of our podcast sponsors. Finally, last call. It is New Year's Day, but we are running our holiday coaching special for any writing hours just until the first week of January. So if you're interested in getting any of ours at the lowest cost for the year, please reach out at Christine at Defend, Publish, and Lead. This will be the cheapest that they are. And then at the end of the first week of January, that's the end of our holiday coaching special. But at the moment, you can get free hours for buying in bulk, and all the hours are at our lower hourly rate. So check us out. We're at Defend, Publish, Lead, and there's a button for free consultations. So if you check that out, you can schedule 30 minutes with me and see what we can do for you. And happy writing in our new year. We're also always looking for podcast ideas. So if you're interested in suggesting a topic, please don't hesitate to reach out. You can check us out in the show notes or drop me an email at Christine at defendpublishlead.com.